talk about Lucy Letby, because we do have this extraordinary situation where so many people are now saying that they think that there has been a horrific miscarriage of justice, a horrible, horrible injustice done to a young nurse accused of murdering and attempting to murder huge numbers of babies, not just at one hospital where this the case which she's actually been convicted have happened, but actually another, the Countess of Chester Hospital, but at other hospitals as well. It was claimed yesterday that an expert witness had changed his opinion. Mr. Dr. Dewey Evans had altered his view about how 3 of the babies that had died in her care had died between 2015 and 2016. The expert witness says that actually that Lucy Letby's lawyers' claims are unsubstantiated, unfounded and inaccurate. He said that. So what is going on? Because there are demands for a fresh appeal. We've already had an appeal, but another appeal on the grounds that this is a terrible miscarriage of justice. There isn't the evidence against Lucy Letby that the court thought there was. How strong is that case?
Well, look, I mean, what Lucy Letby's lawyer said yesterday, Mark McDonald, that the key prosecution witness, Dewey Evans, was unreliable and had now retracted his evidence or changed his evidence with regard to 3 of the babies' deaths. If that is true, Julia, that's a major development, a significant development. There is no doubt about it. If that is the case, as Mr. McDonald claims. In that event, it would be possible for the Court of Appeal to reopen the case. It only does that in the most exceptional of circumstances. Normally, the only route when someone who's convicted has lost their appeal is to go to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. That's the body that investigates potential miscarriages of justice. That can take months, if not years. But it is possible, if a key prosecution witness like this has given the wrong evidence, shown to be unreliable, just had an appeal, it's possible that the Court of Appeal could rehear that case. So that's the route that he's trying to go down, Mark McDonald, the lawyer for Lucy Letby.
Yeah. Well, let's have a little watch. Let's have a little watch and listen of what Mark McDonald told Mike Graham and the Talk Breakfast show this morning. This is, as you say, Lucy Letby's barrister, about the case, saying it could be the biggest miscarriage of justice in history. Let's listen and watch this short clip.
It's quite straightforward. The lead expert volunteered himself to the police and gave a series of hypotheses. As he said, looking at the medical notes, each baby died.
And that's Dr. Dewey Evans, right? And he's now changed his mind.
We're now saying this shift in position is of such fundamental importance, the Court of Appeal need to relook at it. What I want to focus on is the evidence. If this is a miscarriage of justice, it's going to probably be the biggest miscarriage of justice we've had in criminal justice history in this country.
Now, what's interesting here, as I mentioned, Danny Shaw, it's a complicated business. This is that this man himself, Dr. Evans, he has said that the criticisms of his evidence by Lucy Letby's lawyers, including Mark McDonald, are unsubstantiated, unfounded and inaccurate. So it's all very confusing about whether or not he has actually turned on his evidence. Now, I did say earlier that Lucy Letby there had been an appeal. There were cases, there was a sort of court hearings for her to have a chance to appeal. She's been twice refused the permission to appeal against her convictions. Now, there's been a lot of debate in the media. I mean, Peter Hitchens, the leading campaigner on this in the Mail, saying this is a terrible miscarriage of justice. A lot of claims that a lot of the evidence used to convict her was basically sort of circumstantial and statistical, that, well, she was the nurse who was on duty every time these children died or almost died, and that statistically, you know, it would have to be her, etc., etc. But actually, those who've sat in the court case day in, day out, hearing all of the range of evidence, including doctors walking in to find alarms going off and the nurse Letby just standing there over a child rather than helping a child that was intubated in a ward, and that actually the evidence that was presented in court wasn't just circumstantial, it wasn't just statistical and odds, it was far, far wider than that, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I always think you have to give a measure of respect to the jurors who heard all that evidence and sat through it, because we haven't, and the experts who are now coming forward they haven't heard all that evidence. They haven't been in the courtroom listening to the witnesses in person, listening to Lucy Letby being cross-examined for days on end. And so I think you have to give a measure of respect to them. They came up with some verdicts, guilty verdicts on some, acquitted her on others, couldn't decide on others.
Yes, I think that's very interesting. They didn't come back after 2 hours, did they? It took them weeks and weeks and weeks.
It took a long time.
And they said some cases hadn't been proved and some hadn't. Eventually, she got convicted for 15 murders and attempted murders and serving 15 whole life jail terms. But that's it again. When most of us don't, even most court reporters aren't in court for every single day of these trials and don't hear all the evidence and the weight of the evidence. But what is interesting is Lucy Letby apparently is perfectly happy with her defence because she's still employing the same defence team.
Well, I don't think Mark McDonald represented her at a trial, so I think that is a new appointment.
I think the solicitors she was dealing with, I think, are still partners. But this is the thing, if there has been a terrible miscarriage of justice, then obviously we would want there to be a full appeal. But actually at the current time, there are other investigations ongoing, aren't there? Because police had investigated far more deaths at this hospital and not brought all of them to court. But also there are now other deaths of babies at other hospitals where she worked that are being looked into.
Yes, and new revelations coming out in the Thirlwell inquiry, which is looking at the case and what may have gone wrong, the whole circumstances leading up to it, which is raising a lot of other questions. So there is a lot of noise and there are a lot of concerns. I mean, Mr. McDonald is claiming that 50 or 60 experts, health experts, neonatologists and others, statisticians, have come forward to offer their support for the case. Pro bono, in other words, they're not asking for a fee. And that clearly shows that there is, I don't think we can deny, a measure of concern out there about the convictions in the case. And it may be, Julia, it may be that some things were not done correctly in court and that some of the evidence was incorrect. But it may also be that she was convicted on some counts correctly. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle. Yeah. But what you can't have is somehow just tearing up all sort of notions of justice and deciding, well, we're going to rush through this appeal like that. There is a process that has to be followed. She has had a permission to appeal hearing before the Court of Appeal that issued a very lengthy judgment and dismissed those grounds.
I mean, we know the courts have got it wrong before, but I also do wonder again, a pretty young white woman and a nurse, rather more sympathetic character than many of the cases which languish sometimes 10, 15, 20 years before getting a chance to appeal. And again, these factors should not be remotely relevant, but I hate to tell you, I think they often are when it comes to the campaigners. We shall see again. Is there any question marks over it? I'm very happy for there to be a full appeal, simply so that we can get to the root of where it is. Can I also ask you about a case today? This is involving the sentencing that's happening later today, and this is the sentencing of the father and stepmother of little Sara Sharif, who was beaten and tortured and murdered by them. We've had a statement read in court today by Sara Sharif's mother, Olga Domin. She was not living with her mother at the time. She'd also been suspected of possibly being responsible for child abuse, which is why the courts awarded custody to the father. But she has said... she described her daughter's killers as executioners and said, to this day, I can't understand how someone could be such a sadist to a child. What has come out in court, I cannot understand what is wrong with these people. You're sadists, although even this word is not enough for you, I would say you are executioners. I mean, like dying in behind bars, coming out in a coffin is the only punishment that's good enough for these people, surely?
Well, the judge will decide whether or not the father and stepmother get a whole life sentence. That I think is the big decision that the judge has to make. The two defendants who've been found guilty of murder, whether or not they get a minimum term of 20, 30, 40 years, or whether he gives them a whole life order, which means that they will die behind bars. It is clearly a case which potentially falls into that category because it's the murder of a child. It would appear to be there was some premeditation and it involved abuse, the most horrendous abuse over a long period of time. So I think the judge will have to consider that. For the other guilty party in this, the uncle, Faisal Malik, He was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment. He won't get a whole life order, but he will get a very lengthy minimum term.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the whole thing's absolutely horrific. Now, on a rather lesser scale, obviously, than the horrific murder of a child, but nevertheless an attack on, many of us would say, our democracy. The young woman who threw a banana milkshake over Nigel Farage during the election campaign, she was convicted. She pleaded guilty to assault by beating and also criminal damage. But she has not been sentenced to any time behind bars. She got a suspended sentence, 3 months suspended for 12 months, and also, of course, some community work as well. Is that what you'd expect? Because there are big question marks over two-tier policing, where people are going to prison for writing tweets, even ones they've deleted, but someone who actually throws something over a campaigning politician gets away with it, as far as we can see.
I've got to say, Julia, I think that she's quite a lucky woman not to go to prison. And I think an offence like this against a politician of whatever party during an election campaign in public like that, even though there was minimal damage caused, physical damage,
thankfully,
just a cleaning bill, I think a prison sentence sends out a really strong message that that kind of behaviour is just not tolerated. We have a system of democracy in our country. If we disagree with people, we argue with them. We, don't vote for them at the ballot box, but we do not assault them, throw things over them. And I think she's very, very lucky to have escaped a prison term.
Yeah, indeed. Danny Shaw, thank you very much indeed for that.